Donald Trump is attempting to rig the next election. He and his allies in Congress just passed the largest transfer of wealth in American history with their big, beautiful bill. They're literally kicking millions of people off their health care to fund tax cuts for billionaires. And they know it's unpopular, but they don't care because they have a plan.
So whenever I reference the upcoming 2026 and 2028 elections, you probably notice that I always include a caveat about whether or not they're going to be free and fair, because at this point in time, I genuinely don't know if they're going to be free and fair. We are dealing with an overtly authoritarian president who is shredding the Constitution. So it's not beneath him to use his power to rewrite the rules in a way that benefits him and his party. And we now have confirmation that he is indeed trying to make sure that the 2026 election is not fair, which isn't necessarily surprising given how he ominously told his supporters last year that they wouldn't have to vote again if he won the last election. And now he's trying to make sure that that is indeed the case. Now, the state representative that you heard from at the beginning of this video is James Talarico from Texas, and he's one of just a small handful of Democrats currently sounding the alarm about the Republican Party's plan to rig the 2026 elections. So we're going to watch him explain one of multiple ways Trump is trying to do this, and then I'll give you some additional details when we come back.
Donald Trump just called Governor Abbott and told him to redraw the political maps in Texas to gain 5 more Republican seats so they can protect their majority no matter what the election outcomes are. I mean, this is the rot at the core of our broken political system. Politicians choosing their voters instead of voters picking their politicians. In any other industry, this would be called a conflict of interest. And so Democrats here in Texas are going to do everything we can to stop this power grab, because if it happens here in Texas, they're going to do it in every red state across the country. They're going to rig the 2026 midterms. We're obviously in the minority here in Texas. We've been in the minority for about 30 years, so we've learned how to use every tool in our toolbox to fight for people and deliver for people. So we have the rules. We can use the rules to figure out how to slow things down and how to kill bad bills. We can use our platforms to organize people like we're doing out here in Plano. We can also deny quorum because they need all the Democrats to show up to be able to conduct business. We did that in 2021 to stop their voter suppression bill. And so these tactics are all things that we can use and employ to try to prevent this power grab from actually happening.
Now, just so we're clear, partisan gerrymandering is nothing new, as you all know, and new districts should always be drawn by nonpartisan independent commissions. I've always believed this, but what makes this even more egregious than usual is the fact that they're trying to redraw districts 5 years ahead of schedule. And they're targeting districts for black representatives who are the most critical of Donald Trump, including Al Green and potentially even Jasmine Crockett. Now, this would obviously accomplish 2 things. It would protect the GOP's House majority and potentially take out some of Trump's most vocal critics in Congress, which is a scary thought. Now, even though Trump himself is pretty explicit about wanting 5 extra safe seats for political purposes, the DOJ's argument is basically that the current map is unconstitutional and needs to be redrawn, basically because it is racist against white people. I'm not joking. And that's obviously absurd, since Texas Republicans drew districts in a way to deny people of color more representation even as their population grows, so they should be getting more representation. And it's so bad that Texas is being sued over their racist gerrymandering. But by further diluting the voting power of black and Latino communities, Republicans think that they're going to be able to pick up an additional 4, maybe 5 seats in 2026. And as State Representative Lizzie Fletcher put it in an interview with Houston Public Media, what Republicans are trying to do is change the maps, change the game, not win on their policies, not win on their ideas, not win on their records, but dilute the voices of Texas voters, dilute the ability for Texans to have their say about what they're doing. So this is why Republicans seemingly aren't concerned about the unpopularity of their policies. It's why Donald Trump just signed the big beautiful bill into law despite the fact that it strips 17 million Americans of their health care. It's why he's pursuing tariffs despite the risk that that has for the economy. It's because they don't care about their unpopularity, because they are going to use the power that they have now to stay in power regardless of how unpopular they become. And if Texas pulls this off, other red states will indeed follow suit. And there's not really a lot that state Democrats can do, but there is something that Democrats in other states can do to counter this. the same goddamn thing. And as much as I despise Gavin Newsom, he floated the idea of redrawing California's maps early to counter the effort in Texas, because if Republicans are going to play dirty, Democrats have no choice but to do the same exact thing.
And I think there should be a national framework for independent redistricting, period, full stop. I mean, gerrymandering, and let's be fair, we've seen this weaponized by both parties for decades. But these guys, this is a whole nother level of weaponization coming from the right. And what Trump did today is the ultimate tell. They feel they're on the ropes. They feel they're behind. They feel they're vulnerable with the big, beautiful bill. They feel like the momentum is shifting away from them, and it's Speaker Jeffries, it's not Speaker Johnson. So on that basis, they got to rig the game. From my perspective, if we're going to play fair in a world that is wholly unfair, we may have the higher moral ground, but the ground is shifting from underneath us. And I think we have to wake up to that reality. And I'm talking to members of my legislature, what are our alternatives? We can do a special session. I can call for one today if I chose to. We can then put something on the ballot, and I could call a special election. We can change the Constitution with the consent of the voters, and I think we would win that. I think people understand what's at stake in California. I think we'd come out in record numbers. I think it would be extraordinary success. That's a clean way of doing it. It'd be a very short window, because you got to come back with the maps and you got to change all this and prepare for the ballots that are around the corner next year. Or you can look at other avenues, which we are exploring, which are pathways with the legislature to do urgency clauses with 2/3 of the legislature in both of our houses, to move forward with legislative redistricting in between the constitutional construct, which is every census, the Independent Redistricting Commission does a new map.
He's right. This is what you have to do, unfortunately. It's not ideal, admittedly. Frankly, it's undemocratic. But what's the alternative? Let Republicans gerrymander themselves to victory and secure another majority for themselves for 2 more years to do even more damage? Not acceptable. We are dealing with an explicitly fascist authoritarian party who's trying to unconstitutionally steal power away from voters. If you don't respond, we're not going to have a country left to defend. So, of course, you respond in kind. If they gerrymander one of their states, you gerrymander one of our states. There's no other choice. But what I find shocking is the amount of pushback Gavin Newsom is getting from fellow Democrats in California, including progressives, over this proposal. And some aren't just opposed to this plan, they are literally attacking him over this plan. As Politico reports, quote, "Trying to save democracy by destroying democracy is dangerous and foolish," said Assemblymember Alex Lee, the head of the state legislature's Progressive Caucus. "By legitimizing the race to the bottom of gerrymandering, Democrats will ultimately lose." Or, as one Democratic political consultant granted anonymity to speak freely put it, the idea of taking away power from citizens and giving it back to the politicians, the optics of that is horrendous and indefensible. The consultant said, "That's insane. That's a crazy hill to die on." Quote, "Pretty much everything the governor says lately, we have to look through the lens of his eventual run for president," said Mindy Romero, founder and director of the Center for Inclusive Democracy at the University of Southern California. "It just looks like blustering. It just looks like an attempt to get attention and headlines and show himself sparring directly with the president or with Republican leadership." And I don't necessarily disagree with that assessment. Gavin Newsom is almost certainly using this as a cynical ploy to position himself as the fighter in 2028. But with that being said, he's not wrong. And to the head of the California Progressive Caucus, who said that it's preposterous to save democracy by destroying it, I don't think that this person understands the gravity of the situation that we're currently in. Democracy is already being destroyed. Some political scientists have already concluded that we no longer meet the basic criteria to be characterized as a democracy. This is about survival right now. And I honestly don't understand why these people can't get that through their fucking skulls. We have to fight to survive, and that means we do everything in our power to stop Republicans from getting more power. And honestly, I don't even think that Gavin Newsom's plan goes far enough. Quite frankly, we should be considering chopping up states like California and New York into multiple states to increase the number of senators that we have as well. I think that Democratic governors should do everything that they can to break their states' Republican parties, launch frivolous investigations into their members, use state power to threaten their donors, disenfranchise Republican voters if you have to. I don't want to see Democrats become authoritarian like Republicans. But this is the game that they have to play in this authoritarian climate. You have to use all the power you have to stop this existential threat to our country if you want to still have a country. It's not ideal, obviously. None of us chose this. This authoritarian movement was thrusted upon us by a modern-day Nazi movement. But this is what we're dealing with now. And if Democrats don't aggressively and effectively use the power that they currently have, they risk losing it all permanently. So now is not the time for this namby-pamby bullshit. Either nut up or shut up. Because if we don't fight, we die. Us returning to democracy hinges on whether or not we're going to be able to eliminate the Republican threat that we're currently facing, or at least get them to acquiesce. Now, thankfully, there are some supporters to Newsom's plan, including one Texas Democrat, Beto O'Rourke, who says, yeah, you've got to do what you can to stop Republicans from rigging the next election.
Match fire with fire. I think Democrats in the past too often have been more concerned with being right than being in power. And we've seen Republicans only care about being in power regardless of what is right.
So you support the Newsom effort because California right now has an independent commission that does districts in as fair a way as possible, in nonpartisan way as possible. You're saying Democrats should, even though you don't approve of it, Democrats should do it too.
We have to get serious. We have to be absolutely ruthless about getting back in power. So yes, in California, in Illinois, in New York, wherever we have the trifecta of power, we have to use that to its absolute extent. And then the last thing, this may end up biting Republicans in the ass. You have the possibility that they will disperse Republican voters to make up these 3 or 4 or 5 new congressional districts and put those districts in play. So in Texas, we've got to get out there and register and meet the voters who are going to decide the outcomes in these next elections if they're successful with this redistricting. Our group, Powered by People, is doing this right now on the ground. We can't wait for 2026. We got to do the work right now in 2025.
I don't typically agree with Beto O'Rourke as well, but he is absolutely correct here. Now, as Jake Tapper pointed out, correctly so, it is going to be difficult to accomplish this in California since they did what all other states should have done, which is create independent commissions to redraw districts to avoid partisan gerrymandering. But I mean, until the status quo changes in all 50 states, like, you can't kneecap yourselves if the Republican Party isn't willing to do the same thing, and if they're going to play by a completely different set of rules. And thankfully, even Hakeem Jeffries seems to be on board, not necessarily because he's enthusiastic about fighting Republicans, but because he understands that he's not going to get to be House Speaker if Republicans do rig the 2026 election against his party. As Stephen Prager of Common Dreams reports, Jeffries hasn't actually addressed Newsom's specific effort, but he has called for maps to be more fair, and he's been part of private discussions with governors about redrawing maps, and this is pleasantly surprising, but we need to move beyond the talking phase and start getting into the taking action phase, because Texas Governor Greg Abbott called a special session to get this done as soon as possible. So the time for deliberation is already over. It's do or die, literally. But I fear that Democrats will overthink it and talk to consultants and pull test it and talk themselves out of it, or if they decide to take action, it'll be too late. Like, you just have to fucking do it right now. Even progressives like AOC are expressing openness to the idea, but this really should be the #1 priority for all Democrats right now, because they may not have power at the national level, but congressional Democrats can lead the charge in their home states where Democrats do have power. But at the start of this video, I did allude to the fact that this was one of multiple ways Trump is trying to rig the 2026 election, and I want to talk about what else he's doing to stack the deck in his favor as well, because this, of course, is not the only thing. Now, we previously talked about another illegal executive order that Trump signed that would require proof of citizenship for voting in federal elections, and it would also cancel mail-in ballots received after the election. Now, on top of that, there was a really dangerous provision that would have given DOJ some power over state and local elections. It was unsure how much. Nonetheless, any control is a red flag. But the good news is that that executive order was blocked by a judge back in June. The bad news is that that's not the end of Donald Trump's election fuckery, because the DOJ is now trying to pressure county clerks in 9 different states to turn over their voter registration data. And they're also requesting access to voting machines in some states as well, which is not normal. And nobody really knows why they're doing this, but the Washington Post reports election officials fear the administration could try to build a national file that includes personal information about voters or impose rules that would boot eligible voters from the rolls and make it harder to cast ballots. And Samantha Tarazi of Voting Rights Lab agrees, arguing President Trump and his allies are trying to lay the groundwork to interfere with a free and fair election in 2026. So we shouldn't just respond to them requesting this information with a, oh, that's weird, I wonder what they're doing with with that. No, they're trying to tamper with elections in some way, shape, or form. And to explain why this is so troubling, the federal government, constitutionally speaking, has very little control over elections. State and local authorities primarily oversee elections. So it is very ominous for the federal government to ask Colorado to turn over all of their voting records and ask to inspect their voting equipment. That is unprecedented. County clerks are also getting messages from Stephen Miller about their so-called election integrity project, which is obviously another huge red flag. They also reportedly asked Alaskan officials why they're not purging mentally incompetent voters from the rolls. I don't know how you would gauge who is or isn't mentally competent, but I mean, what they're doing here is interfering and trying to make sure that less people are eligible to vote. The Washington Post also reports that they're asking multiple states what they're doing to remove non-citizens from voting rolls, even though you can't register to vote if you're a non-citizen, which suggests that there may be some sort of expectation that states need to disenfranchise a certain number of voters in order to satisfy Trump's criteria for, quote, fighting election fraud or some bullshit. And for all this talk about election fraud, the Justice Department has decided to intervene to defend a county clerk in Colorado who went to prison for election fraud at the behest of Donald Trump, mind you. The Washington Post explains, election officials have been on edge in Colorado since 2020, partly because of Tina Peters, a former Mesa County clerk who was sentenced to 9 years in prison last year over a scheme to let an outsider into secure areas of her office to copy election data. This spring, the Justice Department made an unusual move to assist Peters with her appeal, further worrying election officials. Now, the Justice Department made this move at the direction of Donald Trump, who tweeted about this on Truth Social back in May, writing, "Radical left Colorado Attorney General Phil Weiser ignores illegals committing violent crimes like rape and murder in his state and instead jailed Tina Peters, a 69-year-old Gold Star mother who worked to expose and document Democrat election fraud. Tina is an innocent political prisoner being horribly and unjustly punished in the form of cruel and unusual punishment. There's no evidence for that. This is a communist persecution by the radical left Democrats to cover up their election crimes and misdeeds in 2020. He goes on to say, I am hereby directing the Department of Justice to take all necessary action to help secure the release of this hostage being held in a Colorado prison by the Democrats for political reasons. Free Tina Peters now. Now, he wouldn't want to free this criminal who committed election fraud unless he was trying to send a message to county clerks around the country that if they commit fraud for him, he'll have their backs too. And I don't think it's unreasonable to expect him to break the law to try to steal the next election, given how he literally tried to do that in 2020. He had a fake elector scheme to subvert the will of voters in states that he lost. So we are not dealing with a normal president, and these are not normal times. Trump has no regard whatsoever for the rule of law and for the Constitution. And if Democrats do not do everything in their power to counter the Republican Party's election rigging, we are not going to have free and fair elections going forward. This is as serious as it gets. Simply saying you can't do that, Mr. President, isn't sufficient because he will. He's broken every rule, every norm. He's broken the Constitution. On top of that, he has near absolute immunity and the power to override the Constitution thanks to the Supreme Court. So we need to get it through our heads that this is a turning point in the United States. And what we do now will determine whether or not we'll be able to restore democracy in America in the future. And if Democrats fail to counter the Republican Party's attempts to permanently secure their grip on power, this country really is cooked.
Do yourself a favor and click the join button on YouTube to become a member. Because Mike's doing a great job getting to watch his videos before everyone else is tremendous. Many people are saying this. Join today, folks. You won't regret it.